Forget everything you've ever heard about a healed empath. What I'm about to show you today is not self-help, it's not poetry, it's raw truth. A healed empath is dangerous, very dangerous, and most people are not ready to understand why. Imagine someone who spent their entire life being good, always available, always understanding, always the one who holds everything together. And then one day that person heals, not through pretty words, but through an inner shift so quiet that no one notices at first. They're still polite, still calm, still sensitive, but something disappears. The need, the urgency, the reflex to please. Their phone buzzes. A message appears. Can you help me real quick? And for the first time, there's no guilt, no anxiety, no old obligation, just a strange feeling, silence. Because when an empath heals, they don't become kinder. They become something the world can no longer control. And that's where the problem begins. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from. It's strange how people so far apart end up arriving at the exact same point. A healed empath doesn't announce their healing. They don't post about it. They don't make speeches. They simply stop. And that's what's terrifying, because the world is used to loud change. People who explode, people who fight, people who leave with drama. But the healed empath doesn't do that. They stay just differently, quieter, whole. And if you're listening right now, maybe you felt that shift. That strange sense that something inside you doesn't want to participate anymore. You still feel everything. You still notice everything. But there's something new. You no longer enter the game automatically. Before, empathy was a reflex. Someone felt bad, and you leaned in. Someone was irritated, and you tried to soften it. Someone pulled away, and you ran after them to fix it. You didn't call it fear, you called it kindness. But over time, something begins to surface. A simple, almost shameful question. Why am I always the place where others come to rest? And that question is dangerous, because it isn't about them. It's about you, about the role you accepted for so long. It became your identity. An empath doesn't collapse because they feel too much. They collapse because they feel and take responsibility, as if it's their job to metabolize the chaos of the world, as if peace is something they must deliver. And no one tells you this, but that isn't virtue. It's conditioning, a kind of emotional obedience. And Nietzsche would have smiled bitterly, because he understood something brutal. The herd doesn't control you through force. It controls you through morality, through guilt, through the idea that being good means being available. Healing begins the moment that breaks, when you realize your empathy was mistaken for access, and access becomes exploitation. Not always out of malice, sometimes simply out of habit. People get used to you the way they get used to a light being on. They don't notice the cost. They only notice when it goes dark. And that's where the first thing a healed empath becomes is born. Immune. Not because they shut down, but because they no longer absorb everything. You still notice tension, but it doesn't enter you. You still hear the pain, but it doesn't swallow you. You still feel the weight of others, but you don't carry it as if it were yours. And that changes everything. Because most human relationships are not built through words, they're built through roles. And your role was always the one who endures, the one who understands, the one who never demands. The second thing you become is even stranger. You start seeing patterns, not mystically, but because you've spent too long paying attention. You notice the tone before the request, the manipulation before the guilt. You recognize when someone offers vulnerability as a tool. You recognize the script. And healing is not paranoia. Healing is stopping yourself from pretending you didn't see. Because the wounded empath always saw, they just never gave themselves permission to believe it. And that leads to the third transformation, the most uncomfortable of all. The healed empath becomes a rupture in the system. Because entire systems depended on you. Families depended on your silence. Friendships depended on your availability. Jobs depended on your, of course. Relationships depended on your self-abandonment. And when you heal, you remove an invisible piece. The system begins to creak. People begin to react. Some become confused, others become angry. Because what they feel isn't loss of affection, it's loss of control. And perhaps the most unsettling part is this. A healed empath doesn't need to scream. They don't need to prove anything. They simply stop participating, and to the world that feels like danger. Because a healed empath is still sensitive, but no longer obedient, still kind, but no longer accessible, still capable of love, but no longer self-erasing. And what happens next is the part no one prepares you for, because healing doesn't make you lighter, it makes you too visible. And when you become visible, certain people can no longer stay close. The truth is, no one notices an empath healing when it begins, because from the outside, it looks like silence. But on the inside, it's a revolution, and you only understand what it means when you see it happen in ordinary people, people who spent years being good until the day they became something else. Imagine a man, 38 years old, the kind of person everyone describes with the same word: reliable. He's the first to show up when something goes wrong, the last to leave when someone needs help, the friend who listens, the employee who covers, the son who never complains. He doesn't live, he functions. And for years it looks like virtue, but there's something no one sees. His body is always on alert, always waiting for the next call, the next request, the next "can you real quick?" Because for him, refusing never felt neutral. Refusing always felt like danger. One day he's at work, late afternoon, his head heavy, his phone buzzes. A message from his brother. "I need to talk right now, it's serious." His hand almost responds automatically. The old reflex rises like fever. Of course, but this time something happens. Not anger, not selfishness, just one cold, simple realization: I don't have space. He doesn't answer immediately. 5 minutes, 10, and guilt arrives instantly. His mind starts creating scenarios. He'll think I don't care. He'll pull away. I'm being bad. Do you know that feeling? That emotional urgency that feels like morality, but is really conditioning. Later he answers calmly, "I saw your message. I can't today. Tomorrow I'll listen." Silence. Nothing happens. But when his brother replies, the sentence is too short. "Okay." And that's where the first invisible punishment arrives: coldness. That subtle ice. Not aggression. Withdrawal. As if love were conditional on access. And in that moment, he understands something painful. Some relationships do not survive your boundary. Now imagine another person. A woman her family calls the perfect daughter. She never caused trouble, never demanded, never exploded. As a child, she learned early the house stayed peaceful when she stayed small. So she learned to disappear without leaving. She grew up. She became functional. The one who solves, the one who cares, the one who endures. And for years, this was mistaken for maturity. Until one day, she says no, not as protest, not as revenge, just as a simple fact. Her mother texts, "Can you come by today?" She answers, "Not today." 2 words. The world doesn't end. But her mother doesn't reply normally. She replies with drama. "Fine, I'll manage on my own." There it is. The herd doesn't shout. It uses guilt. It turns boundaries into abandonment. And the woman feels the old impulse. Explain, apologize, chase. But something in her has changed. She stays silent. And silence is unbearable to those who always had access. So the family starts saying, "On, you're different. You're cold. You've changed." As if changing were a crime. But the truth is deeper. They don't miss her. They miss the function. Now a third mirror, a relationship, an empath, and someone who always needs. At first it feels like love, because the empath offers presence, offers listening, offers emotional shelter, and the other person gets used to it, moves in as if it were infinite. Until one day the healed empath doesn't respond with urgency, doesn't run, doesn't dissolve. They simply say, "Not right now," and the reaction comes fast. "You're not like you used to be." That sounds innocent, but it's a revelation. It means, "I preferred you when you were accessible. I preferred you without limits. I preferred you when you saved me." And here is the uncomfortable truth. Healing reveals who loved you and who loved your availability. Because when you heal, you stop being a sponge. And some people only knew how to relate to you as a sponge. And perhaps the cruelest part is this. The healed empath doesn't become cruel. They become clear. They stop negotiating their peace. They don't enter endless arguments. They don't convince. They don't defend. They observe. And that observation changes everything. You realize many dynamics were never love. They were silent contracts. You offer presence. They offer acceptance, you offer sacrifice, they offer belonging. And when you stop paying, the belonging disappears. It hurts, but it liberates. The healed empath becomes dangerous right here, because they can no longer be ruled by guilt. They can no longer be pulled by fear of disappointing. They can no longer be domesticated by morality. And Nietzsche would have said, this is the beginning of strength. Not the strength to dominate, the strength not to abandon yourself. And now we arrive at the question that changes the entire video. What happens when you stop being the emotional shock absorber? When you stop absorbing tension? When you stop fixing the world in silence? The system reacts. And that's where Nietzsche enters like a blade. Because he knew the herd always attacks those who leave their place. Nietzsche wasn't interested in comfort. He didn't write to soothe, he wrote to cut. And few things he despised more than automatic virtue. Because virtue born from fear is not virtue, it's domestication. He believed the morality of the world wasn't created to free sensitive souls. It was created to make them useful, controllable, predictable. And if anyone becomes predictable easily, it's the empath. The empath feels before speaking, notices before asking, feels guilt before even being wrong. And the world learns quickly how to use that. Not through violence, but through expectation, disappointment, silence, through small phrases that carry moral threat. I just needed you. You've changed. You were never like this. Nietzsche would have called it what it is, moral blackmail. Because the herd doesn't need chains. It holds you with guilt, with the idea that being good means being available, that kindness means accessibility, that saying no means selfishness. So you obey, not because of external force, but internal obligation. And that is the deepest prison, the one you believe you chose. Nietzsche called it herd morality, a morality that turns self-sacrifice into goodness and freedom into sin, a morality where preservation is accused of hardness and destruction is praised as altruism, and the empath becomes the perfect saint of that system, the one who endures, the one who understands, the one who never demands. But Nietzsche would ask something disturbing. How many times was your goodness just fear? Fear of losing love, fear of losing belonging, fear of being seen as difficult. When goodness comes from that place, it isn't choice, it's survival. And that is why healing seems dangerous. Because when you heal, you stop being morally controllable. You stop being the mechanism that keeps the system comfortable. You stop being the piece that absorbs tension so others don't have to change. That is a threat. Not because you become aggressive, but because you become free. Nietzsche would say, the world tolerates your pain. It does not tolerate your sovereignty. It tolerates you exhausted. Because exhausted, you remain obedient. It tolerates you sacrificed. Because sacrificed, you remain useful. But when you stop, when you say no, and when you don't explain, the herd feels something is wrong, as if you broke an invisible rule. And maybe you did. The rule that said, you exist to carry. Nietzsche would call it awakening. The world would call it selfishness. And now the real question begins. What do you become when it no longer hurts in the same way? What is born when you stop obeying? There comes a moment when healing stops being internal and becomes public, not because you announce it, but because people notice. They notice in the details, the delay, the tone, the silence, the fact that you no longer run. And that's when healing becomes a problem. Because the healed empath doesn't change personality, they change position. They leave the role of resource, the role of emotional shelter, the role of deposit. And when you leave that role, the world reacts as if it lost a crutch. At first, it's subtle. You reply slower. You explain less. You stop apologizing for existing. You say short sentences. Not today. I can't right now. I'll get back to you. That should be normal. But to those used to full access, it feels like betrayal. Because you were never seen as an individual, you were seen as a function. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Many people weren't connected to you. They were connected to what you offered. Your unconditional presence, your endless patience, your of course. So when it disappears, they don't ask, are you better? They ask, consciously or not, why aren't you available? Confusion comes first, then guilt. The world uses subtle weapons. You're different. You've changed. I only needed one thing. You were never like this. Do you see? It's not about the request, it's about the habit. It's about access being removed. And here is what hurts an empath. Your first impulse is to return, to avoid discomfort, to prove you're still good, to not seem selfish. But healing demands the opposite, holding the discomfort, not as punishment, as sovereignty. Nietzsche would say, the herd doesn't hate you for cruelty. It hates you for unpredictability, because predictability is control. The herd loves who always returns, always yields, always sacrifices. And the healed empath no longer returns automatically. They cannot be morally controlled anymore, and that is dangerous. Imagine a simple dynamic. You finally say no, and someone responds with coldness, with distance, with punishing silence. What is happening? Not wounded love, wounded control. An unconscious attempt to teach, if you set limits, you lose warmth. If you preserve yourself, you'll be excluded. That is how herd morality survives, not through shouting but withdrawal. The healed empath learns something brutal. Some people stayed close because you abandoned yourself, and when you stop, they leave. Or worse, they try to make you the villain, because if you're the villain, they don't have to look at themselves. And that's where healing becomes powerful, because you realize you are not losing people. You are losing chains, invisible contracts, relationships built on your dissolution. It feels like loneliness at first, but it's freedom in raw form. The healed empath becomes dangerous because they no longer perform. They don't over-explain. They don't beg for understanding. They don't campaign for their goodness. They simply live. And those accustomed to manipulating through guilt don't know what to do with that. There is a silent scene that defines everything. Someone asks. You say, I can't. They go cold. They expect you to fold. And for the first time, you don't. The air becomes strange. The silence weighs. And in that moment, something breaks. The old system no longer works. You stepped out of the machine. And that is why a healed empath is dangerous. Not because they harm, but because they no longer offer themselves as anesthesia. They let the world feel its own consequences. They let people carry what is theirs. They let discomfort exist, and that is unbearable for many. The question now is simple. After you heal, what do you do with it? Healing is not becoming stone, not becoming cold, not losing sensitivity. Healing is learning to feel without surrendering, and that requires small but radical shifts. Nietzsche would never tell you to think positive. He would tell you something more dangerous. Stop calling submission goodness. So how does a healed empath live? Not through grand speeches, through 4 silent movements. First, you stop absorbing what isn't yours. The wounded empath enters a room and feels everything and tries to fix everything. The healed empath enters, feels, and observes. Someone's anger is not your responsibility. Someone's mood is not your mission. You don't become a container. You become a boundary. It feels like selfishness at first, but it's emotional maturity. That belongs to you, not me. Second, you slow the reflex to respond. An empath isn't used only for what they do, but for how fast they yield. Urgency is the door. So healing begins with a simple practice: pause, not to punish, to honor yourself. You read, breathe, wait, and you realize the world doesn't collapse. Guilt appears, yes, but guilt is only an echo of old conditioning. It is not a guide, it's a collar trying to return. Third, you learn to say no without a novel. The wounded empath doesn't say no. They write a speech. They justify. They apologize for existing. They soften the boundary to keep love. But a boundary is not aggression. The healed empath understands. Over-explaining is negotiation. So they speak simply, not today, not right now, I'll respond later. No endless justification, no drama. Nietzsche would call it strength, holding tension without buying peace through self-abandonment. Fourth, you accept the social cost of healing. This is what no one puts in videos, but it's truth. When you heal, some people react. Because they lost access, they will say, you changed, you're cold, you're selfish. And maybe for the first time you see clearly, they don't miss you. They miss what you offered. It hurts, but it frees, because real healing requires a specific courage, being misunderstood by those who only understood you when you abandoned yourself. The healed empath doesn't become cruel. They become selective, still capable of deep love, but no longer wasting depth on those who extract. Still sensitive, but no longer accessible. Still kind, but no longer domesticated. And that may be the central point. A healed empath is not dangerous because they attack. They are dangerous because they no longer participate. They no longer enter the guilt game. They no longer perform obligation. They let the world carry what belongs to the world. And that is freedom in its rawest form. There comes a moment after healing when everything becomes terrifyingly clear, not because the world changed, but because you changed place within it. Imagine the same phone buzzing, the same kind of request. Can you just... It's quick. I really need... Before it triggered a reflex. Urgency, guilt, fear of disappointing, fear of losing love. But now, there is silence. They look at the message like an old door, a door that for years was open, and everyone walked through without knocking. They breathe and write only "not today." 2 words, no anger, no explanation, no drama. And what happens next is strange. The body trembles a little. Guilt tries to rise, but they don't obey, because they finally understand. This isn't coldness. This is freedom. The world keeps turning. People keep existing. Life doesn't collapse. The only real collapse is the collapse of the old role. The person who lived to be accepted is no longer in control. And in their place appears someone rare, someone who feels deeply without abandoning themselves. Nietzsche's uncomfortable truth is simple. The world will always call your healing selfish when it was accustomed to your submission. A healed empath is not dangerous because they hurt. They are dangerous because they can no longer be controlled by guilt. They didn't become stone. They became whole. And maybe that is the highest form of healing. Not to stop feeling us, but to stop abandoning yourself. If this put words to something you've carried in silence, consider subscribing and comment. I will take better care of myself. You didn't stop feeling, you stopped abandoning yourself.